Garrett, you spent years studying the nervous system, building technologies around it, and challenging what would be described as traditional models of training and rehab. From your perspective, what do most people completely misunderstand about the nervous system and its role in strength, recovery, pain, and performance?
I think the biggest point to make here is that the nervous system is so vitally important in all those realms, and yet it's often overlooked. It's not really paid attention to or prioritized, because when it comes to rehabilitation, we're often so focused on whatever tendon or ligament or disc is damaged, right? We're more focused on the hardware instead of the software. And yet we've seen that by focusing on the software and the nervous system, the neurological response to injury, we can dramatically accelerate recovery and improve the overall outcomes. And also in fitness too, we're often so enamored with muscle. Many of you listening to this who are high performers and are focused in the gym likely have heard the mind muscle connection concept. And so if you're doing that, you're understanding how important the nervous system is, because you're understanding that muscles don't do anything on their own. They do what they're told to do, what they're commanded to do by the neurological signals that tell them either to contract or relax, right? There's an on and an off signal. And the more on signal you can send to your muscle, the more motor units, the more muscle fibers you're going to contract or engage, and the more stimulus there is for growth, if that's your goal. Or the faster you can send those signals, the better you're going to be able to perform, the more speed and power you're going to be able to generate. And the more intermuscular coordination you have, the more you can signal the opposing muscle to relax at the exact time as the target muscle is contracting, the faster and more powerfully you're going to be able to move. So I think it's the biggest thing that stands out to me is the importance of prioritizing the reasons to prioritize the nervous system when we're talking about health and performance and rehabilitation and movement and function. And a big part of that is because it is the underlying control system of the body. So yes, it controls muscles and movement, and also controls heart rate and blood pressure and digestion and elimination and the reproductive organs, right? The autonomic nervous system controls all of those, and how we feel and our metabolic rate and activity and emotional affect and psychology, right? It's everything about our experience. And yet, at least, now it's happening more. We're focusing more on the nervous system, but for a long time, we were just so focused on the hardware, and I would say not enough on that software.
Yeah. I shared with you beforehand, kind of some of my background in health, training and in bodybuilding. And, I think, at least from my perspective, a lot of what Ben and his crew were doing down there at MI40, where they were very early adopters of muscle-centric training, prior to, maybe the mid 2000s, like a lot of it was movement or exercise focus, right? It's like certain exercises would lead to the gains and the muscle growth that you were seeking. Deadlifts, squats, like those were particular movements. Ben talked more about the movement of the body and making the exercises fit your core mechanics. And now we're getting deeper with, I think what you're describing here is like, there's actually a layer deeper behind that, which is the nervous system, the neuromuscular system. Has this been your witnessing of this kind of evolution of understanding how these systems are working together as well?
I think that's a great connection to make. And I think that Ben's programming, for example, when he talks about really emphasizing, if you're talking about the lat engagement, really lengthening the lat by protracting the shoulder blade and kind of lengthening, getting into that full stretch position, and then fully contracting by retracting and depressing the shoulder blade, and fully extending the arm by bringing the elbow back as far as you can. So extension at the glenohumeral joint of the shoulder. When you're getting the biomechanics dialed in like that, you're maximizing the neurological signal to engage that muscle, because you can't necessarily say isolating, but you're emphasizing as much as possible the action of that particular muscle. So you're going to be both from a biomechanical perspective emphasizing that muscle, and from a neurological perspective increasing activation and control of that muscle, because you're going to be using it more. You're going to have to send a stronger neurological signal to use it in that biomechanical way. So it's sort of two sides of the same coin. It ends up getting us almost to the same place in terms of improved function, increased neurological activation of that particular muscle. So I think that framework that that Ben uses about really emphasizing the biomechanics certainly has a place in this conversation, and yes, does lead to increased neurological function also.
Your device, the newbie, which we're going to get into, I guess right now because I'm bringing it up, is used in a lot of recovery for athletes. Is it more important that we are focused nervous system training to prevent recovery, or is it more beneficial recovery wise to help speed that process up?
I think it depends on what one is after, right? With a situation that one is in. If you're listening to this and you want to train, but you're dealing with pain and you are prevented from training as frequently or as heavy and intensely as you want to do, or doing the exercises you want to do, then it's a matter of, let's figure out how to address that. If you're able to train and you want to be able to increase your volume or recover more or help increase your results, then we can talk about that. So there's different, there's applications when we're talking about influencing the nervous system, which of course we're doing through the unique type of current from this NEUBIE device for neurobioelectric stimulator. That's the device you're talking about, the product for which we're probably best known. There's applications for someone recovering from an acute injury, someone recovering from surgery, but also a whole category of people with neurological or neurodegenerative conditions or chronic pain, which can be helpful. And then there's applications in fitness and performance and recovery. So in fitness and performance, we can use this to like a form of digital weight to increase motor unit recruitment and activation in certain areas. You can increase muscle recruitment in the areas that you're stimulating, but without having to lift as much weight and therefore not getting as much strain or load on tendons and ligaments and connective tissues, and reducing the risk of injury or re-injury. So it can be part of an ongoing program, or it can be part of the ramping back up into training. And then you can also use it to recover by preferentially relaxing instead of contracting muscles. So when muscles are more relaxed, there's less tension restricting the flow of blood, and they're better able to accommodate and rehydrate the connective tissues, accommodate the delivery of all those nutrients and the removal of waste products and all that. So there's benefits there. You can also use it in terms of ongoing movement preparation and making sure that your movement patterns are dialed in during a warm-up before you go to load heavy in a squat, for example. You can preferentially contract some muscles as you relax others. So if you wanted to work on, for example, hip extension, your hip extension range of motion before doing lunges or going to sprint or something like that, you could actually have the machine at the same time contracting the glute as you're helping to lengthen the front side, the hip flexors, quads, adductors there. So there's a whole range of applications, and I don't mean to dodge around the question, but there's a whole breadth of applications here, and it sort of matters on what we are, focusing on, what the individual's goal is that we're talking to or working with. And part of the point here, I think, is the breadth of what you can influence by working with the nervous system. And it goes back to why the nervous system is so important, and how exciting it is to have technologies and frameworks that allow us to harness the power of the nervous system to make change quickly, to help with rehabilitation, with recovery and fitness and performance.
Well, let's go back here a little bit and maybe understand your journey, what's led you here to be so excited about this work, and kind of your journey into launching NeuFit. Was there a pivotal point? Was there an awakening you experienced? Like, what was that moment in time in your life where you realized like you had to go all in and really begin to understand and do this nervous system work?
There was one big pain to power moment for me, and it came on the backdrop of a couple different factors. One was my schooling in engineering and neuroscience, and I'm very grateful to have found ways to continue to pursue those interests and topics about which I'm very passionate. And then also my experiences as an athlete. I grew up playing ice hockey in Chicago, played in college in New England, and I had a lot of disappointing experiences along the way because I had injuries, and then I had treatments in traditional physical therapy, traditional orthopedic medicine, and I was just so disappointed. I would even say disenfranchised by those. So I had then this experience towards the end of my time in college where I tore some ligaments. I was told I likely would have to get surgery. And I ended up meeting a guy who's a chiropractor who's doing functional neurology and using older versions, more like a microcurrent version of direct current. And this was just an amazing, it was like a eureka light bulb moment for me. I went through this experience, and it's the first time I really learned about the importance of the nervous system and the neurological response to injury and how that can influence and support, if harnessed properly, how that can influence and support effective healing. And I saw firsthand the benefits of direct current, this unique type of electrical stimulation that was not very popular, kind of specialized, and how those direct current electric fields could influence the underlying healing processes in the body. And I was able to avoid surgery, ligaments healed on their own. I was so grateful and relieved as an athlete to be back on the ice, and as a physics major, set to go to engineering graduate school, to find something that actually made sense scientifically from first principles. That's the part that was that eureka moment, that light bulb going off, that wow, really had that wow experience, and it created a calling within me to share that type of work with as many people as I could. And so I ended up then, along the journey, working under some other clinicians. I came to graduate school in Austin, Texas, University of Texas, and I met the guy who's the chiropractor for the Longhorns football team. And I started working out of his office, treating people using older versions of electrical stimulation. Just kept seeing ways I wanted to improve the technology, ways that working with the nervous system could lead to these amazing outcomes, that some young kid was able to get these, amazing recovery stories and athletes getting back faster, and then some other people with some really amazing things, and it started to grow. And then, I finally got to the point where I came to realize, for a variety of reasons, that what I really needed to do was, even though I didn't set out to create a medical device company, the next step for me was to create a device, and that became the NEUBIE device. And it's, the time we're having this conversation, it's now been 8 or 9 years that has been out in the world.
Incredible. I think for a lot of people, they see injury, pain management as a byproduct of just aging, right? Especially somebody that was an athlete coming up. Maybe they played, decently high level sports, never making it, all the way to the top. But college athletics, right? A lot of years of strength training, just stressful on the body. Most people reach a point where they just accept that injuries and pains management is going to be a part of their life, right? And I think that's unfortunate for a lot of reasons. But what are they missing in terms of maybe the tools that you're using? People obviously train, biohacking has been on a massive rise. Things like sauna, cold plunge, stretching therapy, foam rolling, all these other things. What can nervous system, specifically with the NEUBIE device, or other ways that people can begin to train their nervous system, aid this person? And what are they missing?
There's a lot of parts to this. When you talk about chronic pain or these nagging injuries that prevent us from being able to train regularly, that is, first of all, a problem, as Frank, and you listening to this likely know how important it is for us to be active, to move our bodies, to use our bodies. Use it or lose it is a very true, powerful axiom and principle there. And so we have, requirements for movement just to maintain health, let alone to continue to improve in certain areas, whether it be maintaining muscle mass because of all the hormonal and inflammatory benefits, whether it's about bone density so we don't fall and break something as we get older, function if we want to continue to be active and maintain our joint mobility so we can get up off the floor. There's all these things that are important for daily life, let alone the ability to, have more energy and more vitality, let alone the ability to perform in recreational activities, whatever you enjoy, whether it's golf or basketball or dance, being able to run and do whatever it might be. It's so important to be able to stay active. So and you're of course alluding to that, Frank, in the question there. So when someone has these chronic issues, I think there's a few parts that we need to consider. One is the the rest, ice, compression, elevation, the RICE paradigm. People often think, oh, I need to rest this. And it's interesting if you look at it through the sort of hardware based paradigm versus software based. If you look at it through the hardware based paradigm of, what matters most is the tissue and it needs to heal. That's where it's sort of traditionally you get to that point where it's about resting and icing and letting this heal. But there's also, from the neurological perspective, the software perspective, you are signaling the body to downregulate. Think about whether our brains want to get us to exert more energy or less energy, right? Our brains want us to exert less energy because we evolved in times of famine, when there could be a famine tomorrow. So our brain wants to conserve energy. It doesn't want us to do more, and it doesn't want us to run faster, to throw a baseball harder, to jump higher in the air, or stretch farther, because it actually is concerned that we might injure ourselves if we do those. So it tries to limit us and protect us. And when we therefore don't at least maintain or explore the boundaries of which we're capable, we start to lose that range of motion, that strength, that speed, that metabolic activity, the mitochondria. We start to use it. That's where use it or lose it applies, where we slowly and subtly narrow our abilities in whether it be aerobically, anaerobically, energy wise, strength, range of motion, etc. So the signals that we're sending to our body are the inputs to which we adapt. And so being able to regularly see ranges of motion and strength and those things, that helps us. So then back to when we're injured, or the RICE, we're getting the signals to downregulate various activities in the body, which often can be problematic. So the goal, when someone is dealing with injury, the goal is to create as much movement and input and load as we can without crossing over that threshold of creating too much input that causes you to re-injury, exacerbate, or make things worse. And the reason we want to do that is because that input is going to signal the body to upregulate protein synthesis and collagen, laying down collagen in new tissue to repair whatever has been damaged, and increase metabolic activity. So you have the energy to fuel that process. All these different underlying processes there. So we want as much of that as we can. And so being able to intelligently strike that balance is one of the keys. And as part of that process of creating input into the body, there's another theme here, which is being able to use technology like the NeuBie. That's where this comes in, because we can use this unique type of current to create input neurologically that is essentially mimicking greater amounts of load and challenge, but again, without that strain or load on the joints, and it reduces the risk of injury or re-injury. So it can make it safer, and it can accelerate the process of getting that input. So you can get these signals neurologically to influence the body to work at a greater rate, to upregulate and make more robust all of the underlying processes that control health and healing. So that's the framework. And we essentially want to, it's one of those situations where you want to go slow in order to go fast. You want to limit what you do by staying right at that threshold of doing as much as you can intelligently without crossing the threshold and injuring and making something worse. And if you keep riding that line, that threshold, you're going to make the fastest rate of progress, and you're going to ramp up as quickly and efficiently and methodically and safely as you can back into the activity, the level of load or challenge that you want to have. So that's the framework that you want to use. Of course, for many of you listening to this, you yourself are, you're a professional, you have a business, and you may not necessarily be a practitioner. So finding an intelligent practitioner who can guide you through this, getting that expertise, is extremely helpful. Finding a skilled physical therapist, chiropractor, someone who can guide you through that process. And I do think that, one point I want to instill is hope that it's possible. We've seen people who have been, former athletes who try to get back into it and just, keep having the nagging aches and pains, or have to get a surgery. We've just seen so many people who, with some concerted effort, end up getting back and being active, and a few months later look back and say, wow, look how far I've come, when in the moment it feels like they're going slow. So I think reframing that can be helpful, and understanding the importance of, why we want to stay active in the first place, why it's important to have regular physical practices and all that stuff too is a big part of it, because that's the inspiration to see through some of these processes, even when it can be frustrating or difficult.
Is there a different way that maybe somebody in their 20s, even early 20s should be looking at this? I turned 42 this past August. So I'm in my early 40s, and I've definitely had to slow things down in terms of the capacity at which I train, the overall intensity, the overall volume. Despite feeling incredibly good at 42, it's not doom and gloom for me, but I've had some wake up calls, realize like I'm not 25, but in my 20s, like I did push the threshold pretty far, seeing what my body was capable, probably going oftentimes above and beyond what most people would deem necessary or even healthy. And I think a lot of what I did in those years shaped me through my 30s to be incredibly healthy, to compete at a high level, and is obviously still allowing me to train and compete where I'm at here today. But I look back, a lot of it, I believe, was planted in my 20s. Should somebody in their 20s, when we talk about this load management, this pushing this threshold, obviously being intelligent and having protocols that you're following, but the body going to respond? Yes, I know it's going to respond differently, but how should somebody in their 20s look at this versus somebody that's in their late 30s, 40s, and beyond?
It's a great topic. And I think the biggest themes to consider here are, one is capacity, and then the other is what I would call probably margin for error, where the margin for error, I think, is what you're describing here of us in our 20s versus early 40s. I'm similar in age to you, just within a couple of years. And I would notice the same type of thing, and yet there can be, of course, based on lifestyle and habits, there can be big variations, right? Tom Brady playing the NFL at 45 is a lot different than the guy who hasn't been active, goes home and drinks a couple beers every day after work, and is sedentary for 12 plus hours a day, right? 45 can look a lot different. So there's that discussion. And then there's also the phenomenon, very real phenomenon that you're describing here, where even if you are active, certainly things can change. So the margin for error for someone, like my children in their adolescence, or us in our 20s, the margin for error is greater because we can have damage and it's going to repair faster. Whereas the margin for error as one gets older tends to get more narrow. And so then the question becomes capacity. There's capacity is load of tissues. There's, you know, there's athletes that, go out and take a run and tear their Achilles tendon. And then there's others that go steps throughout the same game and don't. So there's tissue capacity, which is literally how many, newtons of force or pounds of force can go through that tissue before it tears. So you can make your muscles stronger, of course, and you can make your connective tissue stronger by loading it in certain strategic ways. So there's increasing capacity of the various tissues of the body, increasing capacity of the energy systems. And that's important for recovery too, because if your aerobic energy system is working better, that's when you have, lower resting heart rate at night and stuff like that. Your body's better at creating energy to fuel the underlying processes of growth and repair and regeneration that happen during sleep. And of course, reducing things like, influences like inflammation that would cause subtle breakdown and damage and subtly increase the amount of stress on the body, which decreases capacity to heal and recover from workouts, and has fewer resources available for working towards our goals too. So we want to increase as much as we can capacity, and as the margin for error gets smaller, we need to be more strategic and more intentional about that. And so that means, the more mobility oriented training, where you're focused on using your joints through their full range of motion, so that you learn neurological control, you maintain neurological control in those ranges of motion, and you take your connective tissues there so that they don't start to harden and shorten and solidify you in a narrow, hunchback position, or in these very limited ranges. So So maintaining the neurological control and the health of the connective tissues there. And so that's load and that's engagement. So there's more work that has to be done to maintain and even increase that capacity. And with enough commitment and strategically applied effort, it certainly can be done. So that's what I would look at is increasing the capacity of whatever we need. And oftentimes it's in response to injury. If someone has, like I'll talk about myself. I had just very difficult lower back injury with some discs, and even knowing what I know, it still took me a few months to recover because I fell into this trap that is very common of, for me, I'm generally pretty stiff. So I was working on mobility and I ended up getting too mobile in my lower back and unstable, where I really needed to get more stiff and stable in my lower back and more mobile in my hips and thoracic spine. And I consulted, of course, with people on our team and people that I know, and got some good advice around that. And then once I was able to focus where I needed to focus, then I started working on a lot of strength endurance of the muscles in my core, of my abs and obliques and lower back muscles, and the capacity increased. And then I could go out and ruck or play a round of golf or do various workouts, doing whatever I wanted to do, and it didn't hurt anymore because I was able to increase the capacity in the right areas. Capacity is tissue by tissue or trait by trait there. And then I also had some issues with Achilles tendinopathy from I started doing some jumping and had a little partial tear in the Achilles on ultrasound, and so that's when I really went deep and learned a lot about the power of isometric loading. For a while, the big buzzword in tendinopathy has been eccentric contractions. Really, it's slow eccentrics. That the benefit that you're getting there is amplified even more when you do isometric loading of tendons. And so for anyone interested in increasing the capacity of their tendons, which could be after, people are dealing with tennis elbow or patellar tendinopathy or Achilles tendinopathy are the more common presentations, doing strategic isometric loading there is the stimulus, the input that triggers that tissue to remodel, to come back stronger, for your body to lay down new collagen in the fibers or the sinews of that tendon. So you can increase capacity. And then one other thing here that I think ties together that theme of the nervous system that we've been talking about is, if we want to increase capacity, we have to challenge the tissue or the function towards the edge of its current capabilities, right? If we're not at the edge of the comfort zone, if we're not outside of our current capabilities, there's no reason to change or adapt. And so a lot of exercise, a lot of people go through the motions. You may relate to this personally, or you may at least observe people in the gym who, they do the same weights, the same cardio routine every year for years and years and years, and they never improve. And it's like, gosh, you're going to spend all that time, effort, money to go to the gym. Why not do that? And it's important that we push the edge of our comfort zone. And there's a big part of this that's neurological, that our brain is monitoring everything that's happening, right? All the movements, everything that we're doing energetically and mechanically during exercise. And it's very important that we stimulate ourselves neurologically enough. That means contract muscles hard enough, move through greater ranges of motion, that we move fast enough at certain speeds, that we challenge neurological motor control systems. There's things that we have to do movement wise to challenge ourselves, so that the brain gets the point that something happened, that now we need to shift more fully and more completely into parasympathetic rest and digest, feed and breed, recover and rebuild mode neurologically, to recover and adapt and capture the benefits from that training, so that we end up recovering and rebuilding and remodeling in a way that increases capacity over time. So there's a few different threads there. And I think ultimately that comes down to yes, that margin for error and ultimately capacity.
I think a lot of what we've spoken to here, for the most part, has been the training side of things, the physical exercise, load management, capacity, all all the bits that we've spoken to of here. But I think a lot of people are just walking around in a constant fight or flight, overstimulated state due to many other factors: social media, constant notifications, constant stimuli. The world is always throwing various things, fear-based propaganda, news media. We're not following the healthiest diets. I'm sure there's a role that food and nutrition plays in affecting our nervous system. What role do some of the outside factors have, not just in the training, have in chronic pain, anxiety, burnout, and just overall nervous system overload?
There's some amazing research that shows the effects of exercise on the brain. So if we're feeling stressed and that's leading to anxiety, for example, there's actually research that shows physical exercise can have effects on the brain that are similar to Xanax or antidepressants or SSRI medications. So we can actually be our own pharmacy by moving, by exercising. We can create so many wonderful positive changes that cascade throughout the nervous system and have effects on the brain. So I think one takeaway is when you're feeling stressed, exercise, go for a walk, something like that. And I can almost guarantee you, you'll feel better. That problem might feel a little more manageable. Whatever that big burden was, you might feel a little better able to carry it. You might see a solution in a new way, whatever it is. Or if it's something that already happened and you're grieving about it, it'll help you move through the grief. I think there's a lot of value in mindfulness and meditation practices and things like that too, and how that can help us understand the experience and build the internal mental and psychological resources for dealing with that. What I really want to emphasize in this conversation, though, is the value of exercise for stress, for anxiety, for these psychological issues, because the moving the body has such a profound effect on the brain. There's effects on learning. There's so many wonderful studies that talk about or that demonstrate the effect on students in school when they exercise before a certain class. Their test scores go up significantly because their brains are creating things like BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor, that actually it's like fertilizer for the brain. So when they learn something, their brain is better able to make new connections and solidify that information. So they actually retain it better and they're more active and more alert. So the physical activity is just such a powerful influence. Again, as powerful as many psychoactive medications without the side effects, presuming it's done safely and at the right dose and time, et cetera. You're not getting injured, right? The effect can be profound there. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways in that realm of stress. And then there's other things we can do: going for a walk, time in nature, if you just have a couple minutes between meetings and you're feeling stressed, doing a few diaphragmatic, really emphasizing belly breathing, that can have a profound effect on the nervous system as well. Moving the diaphragm when breathing has been shown to increase heart rate variability, which if you're listening to this podcast, you likely know the importance of heart rate variability. You know that more generally means that your body's in a better rested, recovered state, more prepared, more ready to take on a new challenge. If it's low, it means most of the time it likely means that you're stressed, you're having trouble keeping up with and dealing with the stresses or challenges that you're currently facing. So we want generally, most people most of the time, more heart rate variability, and you'll see that go up from these types of breathing practices, certainly from these types of physical practices. Just having regular movement, just walking and getting outside can make a profound difference.
Let's dive into the NEUBIE device here. You had mentioned that at your time of, I think it was mentoring underneath the chiropractor, that he was using an older type of electrical stimulation, and you begin to see benefits from, I think, what you described as direct current stimulation, which is now what the NEUBIE device does. So how does the NEUBIE, the direct current stimulation, differ from the older types of electrical stimulation? And if you could simplify it in terms like, what is the NEUBIE device actually doing inside of the body?
the biggest difference to consider between these various types of electrical technologies is the difference between alternating current and direct current. So that's why if you're listening to this, you don't see, but if you're watching, you see I have this NeuFit shirt that's styled in the AC/DC font, like the rock, like one of the greatest rock bands of all time, that AC/DC. That's one of the biggest themes here. And the history is very interesting, where some of the benefits that we will talk about, some of the benefits with direct current were known back in the 1960s, 1970s. The Soviets used a lot of these different types of current as part of their sports science program. And in spite of the benefits, there was always one big problem where when you turn direct current up to a high enough level to make a difference in the body, it would cause charges to build up, positive ions accumulate around the negative electrode and vice versa. And that charge buildup creates resistance, which leads to heat dissipation and essentially burns the skin. So you'd have these Soviet athletes with burn marks on their skin. And because of that, direct current totally fell out of favor, rightfully so. And we didn't really use it except for some very limited cases, like delivering drugs through the skin, something called iontophoresis. There's some limited use cases here, but it essentially fell out of favor. It was the baby was being thrown out with the bathwater, and there was this vacuum into which came these different alternating current devices like TENS units, what's called Russian stim, even though the Russians used multiple types of currents. What we call Russian stim is alternating current interferential treatment, FES, and MES. So these different devices that you've likely seen, the Dr. Ho or the TENS units on TV, or the different ones you might see in an athletic training room, physical therapy practice, until recently, and with some of the work that we've been doing, those were generally alternating current because you can get that signal into the body without stinging and burning the skin. So it's safer. However, there are some limitations in that, and you miss out on some of the benefits of direct current. So what are those benefits? Why does it matter? Well, alternating current means that the signal goes back and forth, changing direction, positive, negative, whereas direct current is only flowing in one direction. And our bodies work on direct current. We have nerve pathways that go from the brain down to the body, carrying a signal from the brain to turn on the muscles or activate organs. And that is, call it the southbound lane of traffic. Then we have a northbound lane of traffic from the body reporting back up to the brain what's happening, so it can monitor all the sensory input and information. And if you were on a highway, a northbound highway, and all of a sudden there's a car going southbound, that creates havoc, right? That could be, of course, can lead to catastrophic accidents and things like that. But when you have alternating current, there's a little bit of that type of dynamic happening within the body where these signals are going back and forth on this pathway. And it typically creates co-contractions where muscles on both sides of the body fight against each other. So back to the car metaphor, it would be like if you're driving, you're hitting the throttle and the brake pedal at the same time, and your muscles are fighting against each other. When you turn it up to a high enough level to overload and make a difference, you end up running into those issues where you can actually cause more strain and tension within the body and inefficient movement patterns. And you're very limited, and you're limited in how much input you can create into the nervous system for that reason. Whereas with direct current, we can get a lot more input into the body, so we can create that input into the nervous system and start to repattern or re-educate the nervous system, like we're reprogramming software, getting muscles, getting areas to let go and relax, getting other muscles to contract harder and get stronger, get that level of precision. So it accelerates this process of neuromuscular re-education, of improving movement, of turning muscles back on, helping improve function, range of motion, strength, etc. And these direct current electric fields also influence the healing process, because when you have these direct current fields, charges move and it influences the underlying healing processes in ways that improve the healing of bones, of muscles. We did a study comparing for the first time in humans alternating current and direct current in diabetic neuropathy patients. So it was average age was in their 70s when it's been written off that people can never really heal in any meaningful way. And with alternating current, there was very little change, but with direct current, we saw improvements in sensation and function and pain and increased electrical activity in the nerves. So there's actually some regenerative changes happening in the nerves, even in just 6 weeks doing this. So there's, if I speak with a lot of conviction here, it's both because of the personal experience and because of this study and others, and some of the benefits that we've seen. So there's all these benefits of direct current, but we weren't able to harness them because of this issue with stinging and burning the skin. And so the big breakthrough is that we've found ways to get direct current into the body where there's no skin discomfort, stinging, burning, none of that. it's still comfortable from the perspective of the skin, and we can get that into the body so we can take advantage of all these known benefits there. So that's the engineering or technology breakthrough. And then that allows us to do things like, for example, because of the effect on the nervous system, we can do, if you're watching, you can see me, I'm taking an electrode, I'm scanning it around on my shoulder, all the muscles around that shoulder joint. We can scan around, and because we're mimicking the same signals that happen when we load or stretch or challenge or put force through tissues of the body, we can scan around and find where everything is working well and up to the challenge, or where the nervous system either hasn't been activating recently because of bad habits, or where it's actively guarding and limiting in response to injury or trauma, where there's hypersensitivity because of chronic pain or the presence of inflammation. We can scan around and find those, so we know exactly where to treat. And that's a big part of the battle. You can try doing corrective exercises until you're blue in the face. But if you're having to fight that uphill battle to engage muscles that your nervous system doesn't want to engage, you're going to be very limited. It's going to take a long time. There's going to be a very low ceiling on what you can accomplish. So this allows us to get right to the issue, to accelerate that process of learning the proper movement pattern again, whether it's the hinging, lunging, which for walking gait, squatting, lifting the arm up overhead, pressing, pulling, twisting, whatever it might be. It allows you to engage the right muscles so you can do that movement in a much more efficient and healthy way where you're resistant to injury, and you can load that and train that and get more active and get more movement without getting sidelined or derailed by pain and injury.
I think the piece there where you're able to scan the body and find out where something isn't properly firing really jumped out to me. I've worked with a lot of ART specialists, MAT practitioners over the years. You'll slightly tweak something in training, something will be off a little bit, and you go seek some help, right? Hoping that they're going to be able to uncover exactly what it is. And, they're feeling certain things around, and then, they do all their various techniques that they have, different tools get pulled out, and you go through these massive beat up sessions. You come away not bruised, but, you're discolored and cupping all these pieces, hoping that, the next time you get back in the gym, things are going to be firing and moving correctly. It sounds like, because it's technology based and it's scanning the nervous system, like this would be almost a way to improve or almost guarantee that they're finding the right spot to work on.
Beautifully said. I agree with that. And there's certainly value in techniques like ART, where you're reducing the adhesions, or you're unsticking connective tissue so layers can slide and glide better over each other. That opens up more capacity for movement. You can do some of that with self myofascial release, with ART, with these other techniques there. So you're opening up more potential to get into greater ranges of motion. And then the question becomes, do you have the neurological control in that area so that it's safe? Because if you get too floppy and you get into ranges of motion where you don't have control, that is a lot of times where injury happens, or where your brain will recognize that it's unsafe and unstable and will create tension to limit you and pull you back into that margin of safety, that more narrow window of movement. So when you look at range of motion, there's both the ability of tissue to go into those ranges, and there's also the ability of the nervous system to create the right amount of tension and relaxation, to have that balance to allow you to move through ranges of motion there. So they're both important. What we're really emphasizing here is the motor control piece, which, if there is a connective tissue component, you do need to load and spend time in those so the connective tissue can adapt. That can be a little more slow going. But if you have the motor control and you spend time in those areas, the tissues will adapt to the ways and the ranges in which they're loaded. The key oftentimes is being able to get that motor control, because if you just open up the tissues with some of those passive techniques, you mentioned MAT, that's doing more of what I'm describing here, where it's teaching you to engage those muscles. And then you might hold isometrics in certain positions to reinforce that. And then using technology like the NeuBie can help you reinforce that even further so that it sticks longer, and you end up being able to increase the load and the capacity in those ranges so that you can create more force and you can be more resistant to injury in those ranges.
Now, does this become something that you use for short period of time, right? So the sessions get in there, you're using the NeuBie device, you're improving the neuromuscular contraction, you're learning greater motor unit recruitment using the device. Does the benefits stick, right? So, or do I have to continue to use the device forever?
The answer is a little different at different phases. So if we're working with someone who has an injury and in response to that injury, they have various protective and compensatory patterns, right? Guarding in some areas, shutting down in others. Once we work through those and reset those and get back to baseline, they shouldn't come back unless there's another injury. So there you can stop using them for that, using the machine for that purpose. Then the question becomes, okay, we're back at this baseline. Do we just want to maintain this? Do we want to work on a next goal? So it's where do we want to go? If our goals are to increase speed or strength or flexibility or coordination patterns in some activity, or to hit a golf ball farther or to run faster, if the goal is to increase capacity, then there's always going to be things that we need to keep doing. Even if the goal is just to maintain a current level of healthy function, there's a minimum amount of movement and stimulation you're going to need just to maintain that, right? Because of use it or lose it. So then we can talk about, is there a particular thing that you want to and like to do and will stick with? Great, let's do that. If it's working and you'll do it consistently, great. If you want to use the NeuBie, if you want to use technology to make it more time efficient, more effective, more precise, more likely to hit that goal, then we can talk about ways to use it in an ongoing basis. So I would frame it there in that ongoing scenario. I would frame it like brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth once and you're good for the next week or month. I mean, maybe some people try, but right, you generally speaking, have to do it twice a day on a regular basis. And movement is the same way. We have ongoing minimum requirements for movement hygiene, just the same as we do for, say, physical hygiene. And if one can do those effectively and efficiently and safely and sustainably without the NeuBie, great. If they want to use technology to make it more efficient, more effective, and then there's ways to work it in there too.
I guess my question was coming more from, okay, if I want to get more quad activation in a leg extension, I could come in, I could get some sessions, I could do some work with a NeuBie device. Would I then be able to step back into the gym minus the NeuBie device and have the benefits carry over? And then obviously, go continue to get check-ins and kind of tune it up. But like, would doing sessions to improve neuromuscular firing in a specific exercise have a carryover into that exercise absent of the NeuBie device?
Yes, a great question. And there are many times that I've heard people tell me, wow, I did that one session and then I went to the gym and then I felt my lat or I felt my glute engaged for the first time in ages and ages and ages. So there is some carryover effect, and that will last some period of time. If you do one session, you'll probably have changes that might last a few days. That's why it's good to do another one a few days later and continue to build on that. And then it's like learning any new skill. If you're learning a new language or you're learning a new dance, new choreography, if you go and do it once and then you never do it again, like the next day you might remember something, the day after that you might remember something, but a week or two or a month later you probably won't remember much of it. So it's the same framework. If you do one session with the NeuBie, a couple of days later, you'll have this increased activation. You'll still have some of the carryover effects from that, but absent any other work, a month or two later, it'll probably go back to baseline. So there's some carryover, just the same as learning another skill, I think is the best way to frame it.
Yeah. I think obviously the audience is going to be at a lot of different stages. There's going to be people hearing this that are dealing with chronic pain, injuries. They're going to be interested in finding you guys for those specific reasons. There's going to be those former athletes that we were talking about. There's going to be guys just getting into training maybe later on in life and looking, to improve and just optimize overall health. For all those guys out there, like, where can they learn more about NeuFit, the NeuBie device, and how accessible is it to find for most people?
As of the time we're having this conversation, there's between 400 and 500 clinics around the United States that are offering NeuFit treatments and the NeuBie device. And it's a mix of physical therapy clinics, chiropractic offices, and then some other, wellness centers or gyms, places like that. And the best place to find those is to go to our website, which is www.neu.fit. That's NEU.fit. And there's a directory there. You find a practitioner. And we're also on social media. So there's content on there that can be educational, helpful. NeuFit RFP on Instagram and Facebook for rehab fitness performance. You're also welcome to interact with me. I'd love to chat with you on Instagram. My personal is Garrett.Salpeter. And the use case there, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, gosh, I have an injury or this pain is really preventing me from training, or I want to be able to build a more sustainable routine, many of the facilities that are out there that you'll see on our directory can be very helpful to you. If for some reason there's not anyone nearby or you can't work with them, you can connect with our team through the same website, and we can talk about using a machine at home or doing something virtually and stuff like that. It is, wherever possible, my first recommendation to go and work with a local professional who can work with you in person, hands on. That's often a very good recipe.
Amazing. And guys, we'll have all of Garrett and NeuFit's links and sites plugged down there in the show notes. I think you mentioned, Garrett, 7 years since you founded and started this. What's been the biggest aha or maybe takeaway for you that unexpected since jumping into this work?
One might be the degree to which we can change and how powerful neuroplasticity is. I've seen some stories of people who either were wheelchair bound from spinal cord injury 25 years prior, or have been wheelchair bound for 5 to 10 years because of MS. And with consistent, concerted effort, we've been able to help them regain their autonomy and quality of life and start walking and getting out of wheelchairs and make these profound, inspirational, transformative shifts. And it's things that virtually no one thought was possible. I didn't necessarily think or know were possible until we started doing it and had a little bit of that exploratory, let's see what we can do, let's see what can happen, and working with people who have a good attitude and are willing to try. It's a combination of factors that led us to some of those. But I think it's probably an inspiring message of really having a lot of enthusiasm and humility and excitement around the capacity that we have to change, to improve, to overcome challenges, to rebuild. I think it's really, really profound, whether it be in getting out of wheelchairs or changing behavior or changing patterns of addiction, things like that as well. The power of neuroplasticity can be harnessed for good or for evil, and there's many ways that we can harness it for good. So hopefully that can inspire some people listening to this to make positive changes in their own lives.
Yeah, amen to that. Where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years? And what, if any, role is AI specifically playing in either what you guys are doing with NeuFit or how you see the space evolving?
In terms of where it's going, certainly AI is a part of that. I think we're all going to be able to have, through some of our innovations and generally in the industry, I think we're all going to be able to have very clear information that takes the guesswork out of why we have aches and pains when we run or play tennis, or we're going to be able to know precisely from the cameras on our phone exactly what our movement problems are, exactly what we need to work on, using technology like NeuFit, like we're talking about here, to help accelerate those so that we have a lot more power and ability to help ourselves. I think the information we're going to have and that ability is just it's going to be like a superpower. AI can feel like a superpower now, and creating images or videos or writing documents. It's going to also, I think, be a superpower that we can apply to ourselves. And we certainly intend to be a part of that in being able to help people identify movement challenges that are leading to pain, and ultimately helping millions and millions of more people get out of pain so they can do the activities they love to do and live the best possible life that they want to live with vitality, being able to be active. That's such a big part of life. And that's why we exist and why we want to continue to reach more and more people.
Yeah. A couple more questions, Garrett. This one's going to feel like it's coming out of absolutely nowhere, but you briefly mentioned walking gait about 10 or 15 minutes back and talking about injury and I don't think it was longevity, but more just injury. It's something I've become wildly fascinated with is how human beings walk. I linked up with some GOTA specialists about 5 years ago now and went through about a 6-month journey with one of them, completely, I would say, rewiring my own personal walking gait. And the benefits I feel from that have been life changing, just in terms of movement, what I'm able to do athletic wise, what I'm able to do within the gym with a lot of squat patterns and movements that I struggle to do for a very, very long time. What for you as kind of a professional here, what can somebody's walking gait tell you about like their body? And what are some things that people should be looking at in terms of improving or optimizing walking gait?
That is a really excellent topic. And with a lot of these camera based movement analysis, AI driven pieces of software that are out there, I think everyone in the next 1 to 3 years is going to be able to, set up their camera, set up their smartphone, and be able to get insights into exactly what their walking gait is telling them. And there's so many components to gait. There's range of motion in the big toe and the ankle and hip, and there's actually rotation at the hip, even though it looks like we're just moving forward and back. And then there's balance, because for part of the gait you're on one leg, and so are you tipping over side to side, or are you able to stay stable? And there's rotations in the spine as well, and a little bit of movement of the shoulder blade, and you can tell where there's restrictions or where there's limitations, where tissues are stuck or too tight, not moving properly, where there's issues in balance and coordination patterns. So you can really tell a lot. For many people, doing something like a functional movement screen or FMS can be a little easier to administer, because you can easily see, oh yeah, the person gets into the deep squat or not, they maintain their lunge position or not, they fall over or not. So there's a little, and that sort of breaks out some of the components of gait that we described there. There's the range of motion, the coordination, the balance, etc. So you can screen and tell where that dysfunction is. Then you break it down into the component parts, and then work on the weak link, and then build it back up so the gait will improve as well. So there's a couple different avenues there. It's also fascinating, just as a comment, to, if you're sitting in an airport and your plane's delayed, watch people walk and see the different gait patterns and the different compensations. That can be really fascinating. So there's so many underlying components to effective gait that it's a very rich source of information. Without a trained eye, though, you might be able to notice something's off, but it can be helpful to use something like that FMS to break it down into the components and be able to more easily sift out which is the most pressing issue.
Yeah, I catch myself all the time from being at the Lily Field youths, looking at kids and how they move and walk, all the way up to, like you said, sitting in the airport, just watching all the various people walk by. It's become a weird fascination of mine. So I'm glad I was able to kind of ask you about all that. Gary, man, I've really appreciated everything we've dove into here today. We're obviously going to link up everything down there for the guys below. Check out NeuFit, their link, see where a clinic or practitioner is local in your area, and connect with Garrett right there on IG. So as we wrap it up today, final question we'd like to ask all our guests. The title of our show is called The Superhuman Life. And for me, it's been, a journey of learning and growth and optimization, but I love to always get the guest take here. So, in your eyes, with your expertise and what it is you do, Garrett, how would you define living a superhuman life?
For me, a superhuman life is having a brain and nervous system that can process as quickly as possible all of the information that comes into our environment, internally and externally, be able to act upon it, filter it, prioritize it, and create the best possible output that's most aligned with our goals. And there's things that we can do training wise to train ourselves to better be able to process input, and even in the face of stress and challenge and adversity, we can be like the eye of the hurricane. Even with all this chaos around us, we can still be centered and grounded and create the output that we want to do, whether that's movement or whether that's speaking the right things during a presentation. So to me, that's superhuman. It really is the ability to thrive in our environment. And it ultimately comes down to that neurological skill of being able to process all those inputs, still create a good output. And that is something that can be trained. So I would segue that into an encouragement for people to think about how they can incorporate more neurological challenge, more brain challenge in your training, whether it's learning new movement patterns, whether it's, if you're a runner, it's timing your sprinting to see if you can increase your speed over time. Find ways that you can push yourself neurologically, because the dividends will be great in many areas of your life.
Love it. Guys, hope you got value out of this one. If you did, make sure to rate, review, share this one across all the platforms with as many people as possible. Make sure to connect with Garrett and the NeuFit team. We'll link their sites down there in the show notes below. And as always, guys, we appreciate you hanging out. For your host, Coach Frank Rich, Garrett Salpeter of NeuFit. We love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.